Laid with spoken.
The Becoming of Cryonics
By Dana Bergmore. Digital narration, performed by multiple digital voices.
April 2010, first departure. Fran.
Do we call it the death flight?
Joseph asked as they moved forward in the boarding line. He'd craned his head around to speak to his wife of nearly 49 years as she pushed his wheelchair. Fran's eyes narrowed at him as she leaned down, closer to his ear.
We most certainly do not. And keep your voice down, you'll scare the other passengers.
They attracted enough stares as it was with him in a wheelchair, looking the way he did. Even with his scraggly beard, she noticed his gaunt face with sunken cheeks from his months-long nausea. His 2-year battle with cancer was at its end. So much so, this flight, which honestly, truly was a death flight, Fran thought, would take him to his final resting place, Scottsdale, Arizona, home of cryonics industry leader Albireo.
You really do look better since they fluffed you up, Jojo.
The airline staff scanned their tickets. The hospital doctor had correctly guessed that he'd respond well to a load of nutriments injected directly into his veins, bypassing his problematic gut altogether.
I feel better, too. Nothing a little extra blood and being fed by way of an IV of the arm couldn't help. But it wasn't nearly as fun as eating. Well, back when eating was fun anyway.
He might not have much energy left, she thought, but he still had enough to keep things light. Fran smiled at his comment. She'd had decades of Joseph humor, and even now he seemed to enjoy entertaining her when he wasn't puking. They parked the wheelchair at the end of the loading bridge, and Joseph stood. She knew he'd be fine to walk the short distance to their seat in row 25. The trek through the Spokane airport might be nothing like in a major city, but it would have wiped him out and used up all of his fluffing power, so they'd opted for the wheelchair.
Welcome aboard.
The flight attendant greeted the couple as they shuffled in procession onto the 747, trailing a young couple with 3 little kids and a woman with a baby, and all the carry-on luggage allowed. All Joseph needed to do, Fran thought, was survive the 2.5-hour journey, catch a ride to the hospice, and he could die within spitting distance of Albireo. Their preparations were meant to ensure a fast cryopreservation, which would set him up for the best possible chance for reanimation in the future. Assuming reanimations ever became possible.
Okay, I'll put our bag in the overhead bin.
They approached row 25. She knew he'd prefer to do the heavy lifting for them, but there was no chance he had the strength to heave even an empty sack over his head. Dying sucked, as he'd mentioned to her a few times, and she thought of it again now.
Thanks.
He looked up at the overhead compartment before maneuvering himself into the window seat and lamely fumbling with the seatbelt.
Here, let me help.
Fran swiftly sat in her middle seat. Joseph had celebrated his 72nd birthday a few days prior. Fran would turn 72 before the end of the year. He wouldn't be there for it, and she wondered how that would feel. Would she ever be able to celebrate anything again? She blinked back her threatening tears and fished around for his buckle. Step 1, she reminded herself, get Joseph to Arizona.
It's okay. Let's get you settled and you can snooze the next few hours away.
She'd had a long career as a nurse and knew how to push through hard situations and get the job done. She channeled her inner professional nurse and relished having a job to help keep emotions at bay. He smiled at her.
Thanks, babe.
She softened at hearing the old nickname, always used when he was feeling sentimental. He rested his head back and looked out the window. She couldn't imagine what must be going through his thoughts, knowing so much of what he saw and did would be the last time ever. At least the last time this time around. A younger woman sat next to Fran and smiled politely. After shifting her gaze to Joseph, her smile dropped. She stood, grabbed her laptop bag, and Fran watched as she intercepted a flight attendant to request a different seat. If she thought what Joseph had was catchy, that suited Fran just fine. They could use the extra space and privacy. Fran turned to say something to her husband, but it seemed he'd missed the brief encounter and was still looking out the window.
Do you think
She leaned in to bait him into a reminiscent conversation.
that we'd have signed on with Albireo, leading us to be here today, on this flight, for this purpose, if you'd never read Eric Drexler's Engines of Creation?
He played along.
The gateway spark for me. Nanotechnology leads to cryo success.
He lifted his victory fist to shoulder height.
I'm sure I would have read about it at some point.
With his voracious reading habit, she too figured he would have stumbled on the concept one way or another.
Well,
She was happy to have engaged him.
here's to humanity, sorting things out in the future, so we can look back on this experience.
And laugh about it.
He rested his head back again.
Right.
She nodded once, not sure that she'd ever laugh about this. She wove her fingers through his and realized that in addition to everything else, she'd miss his crooked finger.
I think it would be a dandy idea for you to rest now and sleep through the flight.
He closed his eyes as directed. Normally an expert napper in such circumstances, he fidgeted, shifting his position every minute or so during the pre-flight activities, takeoff, and the first half hour of the flight. She figured he wasn't getting any rest, but she didn't disturb him, hoping he'd fall asleep eventually, and then, maybe, she could relax. After assessing him visually for the 100th time, she watched as he flopped his head to face her. With his eyes open, she could see the dramatic dip in his vitality. His glassy red eyes brought out his ashen pallor.
I don't feel so hot.
He blinked at her. She took her hand out of his and put it on his forehead, feeling his pulse with her other hand. She scowled.
You don't look so hot either.
His pulse, though not robust, felt solid and steady enough, but when he shivered, her optimism for an uneventful flight shrank. Damn it. She needed this trip to go smoothly, for both of them. Her eyes flitted between his face and the aisle, wondering if she should call an attendant.
I tell you,
He took a breath.
I'm sick to death of feeling nauseous.
Using the phrase sick to death had become his go-to joke of the last few weeks, and she only half appreciated it.
Let's get you a blanket.
Fran saw him shiver again. She pushed the attendant button above their heads. The flight attendant's change of demeanor the second she arrived reinforced Fran's concern. She wasn't overreading the situation.
Could you please get some blankets for my husband?
Of course. The attendant hurried off. Minutes later, she handed over 3 blankets and hovered as Fran draped them over his legs and chest.
Is there anything else I can get you?
The woman dropped her head lower to whisper.
Do we have a problem?
Fran spoke quietly, matching the attendant's volume.
I think we'll be all right now, but I'll let you know.
A half hour later, Joseph's earlier joking fully ceased. He couldn't stop shivering, even when they brought heated water bottles to place against his legs.
Would you like me to ask if we have any doctors on board?
The attendant looked up the aisle, as if she might discover one by sight. Fran's heart sank. Calling for a doctor would somehow make things more real, more desperate, but she already knew it was real.
That might be best.
Fran scanned those around them who, if not asleep, were watching the proceedings in row 25.
Hang on.
Fran squeezed Joseph's hand lightly.
How could this happen? We still have another hour of this flight. Don't you tank on me.
His only response was a grunt and a slow blink. The announcement came over the speakers, politely asking if anyone was a doctor, and everyone in the vicinity looked her way. Fran wasn't sure what a doctor would do, or what sort of doctor they'd get. For a time, years ago, she'd stopped going out to restaurants because of an unfortunate string of outings where there was a need for a medical professional. No doctors ever seemed to be present, and she'd risen to the occasion to aid her fellow diners in distress. The time that broke her of her desire to dine out was when a man had a heart attack in the men's bathroom. She performed CPR on him until the paramedics arrived and declared him dead. Were there honestly no doctors in those restaurants? She'd always wondered. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later. No doctors had responded. One vet tech volunteered, but Fran shook her head. She was way more qualified than a vet tech.
Jojo, hold tight.
He'd looked terrible before, but drained down even more after the fruitless announcement. Within minutes, Fran pushed the button again, fearing he wouldn't make it to the hospice at all. When the woman she now considered their personal flight attendant returned, looking desperately uncomfortable, Fran asked if they had oxygen she could give him. The other woman seemed relieved to have a concrete mission and practically ran down the aisle to get the bottle. As Fran waited, her thoughts spun on what would happen if Joseph died in the next few minutes, a real possibility based on his slumped posture and shallow breathing. She composed her face into what she hoped was professional and possibly even confident-looking, despite blinking back freaked-out tears. If he died on the plane, she could only imagine how complicated things would be between the airline, possibly the airport, and Alberio. No way would they release him to the cryonic facility right away. And even if they did, it would probably be way the hell longer than if he died, as planned, at the cryonics-friendly hospice. Fran's mind felt stalled out, looping through worst-case scenarios. She snatched the bottle of oxygen from the attendant and put it on her lap while turning the valve. Telling herself to calm down, she placed the mask over Joseph's face. She rubbed his arm hard to wake him, acutely aware of the nearby passengers who surreptitiously followed her every move.
Joseph,
Fran spoke directly in his ear.
Joseph, wake up!
Only when he stirred a little did she have the strength to feel his neck for his carotid pulse. Obviously, he was alive, but she wanted to know how strong his pulse was. Thin and weak. That's what she found, which was what she'd expected. Shit. She blew out an exaggerated breath to settle her nerves. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This was, in fact, nearly the opposite of how this was supposed to go. She turned up the oxygen and sniffed in when his eyes fluttered open and he lifted his head. At this point, she'd be thrilled to have another 2 hours with him. Just 2 short hours to get him to the hospice where he belonged.
Hi.
He slow-blinked his drooped eyes in return, breathing shallowly. The attendant, who couldn't do anything more to help, still stood by, and if for no other reason, Fran was grateful for the company and her body blocking the view from a few passengers.
We're about 20 minutes out.
She nodded to Fran.
And I need to help with the final cabin check now. You'll be okay?
Do you have a way to make a call for us to have the person we're meeting come to the gate?
We can't call now, but if you give me the number, I will as soon as the captain clears it. She's aware of the situation.
Fran handed her the number for Derek Stevens, their Alberio contact.
He'll want to be there.
Fran didn't want to explain who he was or how he could help. In all honesty, she had no idea if Derek could help them. Arrival. Fran. The touchdown roused Joseph enough to cause Fran to let out a sigh. She could hardly believe he'd made it alive. Not very alive, granted, but definitely not dead. Yet.
The wheelchair is here now. We'll help get your husband in it.
The attendant had come back to them after most of the passengers had deplaned. Fran had kept her head turned away from them as they walked past, knowing that they'd likely terrified at least a few people. The attendant scrutinized Joseph, who had slumped over again.
Is he?
Fran nodded.
Miraculously, he's still with us.
A burly young man scooped up Joseph and placed him in the wheelchair seconds later, the movement rousing Joseph yet again.
Sir, we need you to hold your arms in.
The man showed Joseph what he meant. Joseph tucked in his elbows and gazed into his lap as they rolled him off the plane, Fran behind them, their carry-on bag in hand. An airline representative met them inside the airport.
I understand you wanted someone to meet you here. I've been in contact with him.
She looked at a slip of paper.
Derek Stevens. He didn't have the necessary paperwork to get through security, so he said he'd meet you outside the security entrance. Is there anything else we can do for you at this point?
Can you help me wheel him out?
Fran adjusted her purse and the handle of their carry-on bag.
Of course, we'd be happy to.
Ma'am?
The young man who loaded Joseph into the chair and wheeled him off the plane nodded at Fran, indicating he was on task, and started leading the way out. Fran had never met Derek before, but he'd clearly deduced who they were and rushed over to the wheelchair as soon as they passed into the unsecured area of the airport.
Mrs. Delane?
He quickly glanced from her to Joseph.
Yes, but please call me Fran. Thank you for meeting us. Joseph almost didn't.
She trailed off, blinking.
Of course, I understand. The flight didn't go as smoothly as we'd all hoped.
He crouched down and took Joseph's wrist. Fran recognized the move and was only partially sure he'd find Joseph still had a pulse.
Joseph, are you awake?
Fran figured that was his euphemism for, "Are you alive?" To her relief, Joseph lifted his head, and she felt a surge of pride for him, as if he'd won an Olympic medal in staying alive.
Ah, hello there.
Derek glanced at Fran.
I'm Derek Stevens from Alberio.
Fran's tension she hadn't realized she held drained away when he said the words. They weren't all the way there yet, but close. She didn't need to be the one in charge anymore. Joseph licked his lips, then tried to say something, but Fran didn't hear any sound. Derek, still crouched by Joseph, caught the wheelchair pusher's attention.
I'd like to get some vital signs on him before we head out. Are you able to call for the airport medics?
Yes, sir.
He pulled out his walkie-talkie. A few seconds after he made the request, the response came for them to go to baggage claim to meet the medics.
Would you like me to keep pushing?
He'd spoken to Fran, but then directed his attention to Derek, who gave the answer.
Please do.
Derek stood to walk beside Fran.
I'm not sure how long he's going to last.
She walked close by so she could keep her voice low as they headed toward baggage claim.
Should he still go to the hospice? What if he doesn't make it there? What happens to him then?
It's a valid concern, Fran, and not the ideal scenario. I thought I'd just be meeting you to say hello and escort Joseph to the hospice, so I didn't bring in my stethoscope or anything. I hadn't expected him to come in like this, so we need to get a read on his vital signs to assess. Hopefully we should be on our way quickly. The hospice driver is already here and waiting.
Understandably, Derek walked at a rapid pace and spoke with a tight face. Fran was thankful to realize this mattered to him too. The whole reason they'd made this terrible trip was so Joseph would have the most ideal cryosuspension they knew how to perform. She'd be damned if the flight wound up ruining his chances at that. They just needed to get him to the hospice. He could die there. She sighed, almost amused at her turn of thoughts. It was like her thoughts before giving birth, but for the reverse reason. Not here, not now, she remembered thinking as her due date approached. When Joseph first became sick and felt nauseous all the time, he'd joked with her that maybe he was pregnant. Assuming he rallied, she'd have to tell him her comparison. He'd enjoy the humor of it. Off to the side of the baggage claim, Joseph, Fran, and Derek waited for the airport medics to take the vital signs. The two men arrived carrying a case and a small bottle of oxygen. Joseph barely had the strength to acknowledge them, but at least he was still trying to act lively. They quickly took his blood pressure, felt for his pulse, and pried his eyelids open while the finger clip got his oxygen saturation.
We need to get this gentleman to the hospital now.
The medic stood ramrod straight.
We'll take it from here.
He took over the wheelchair handles from the young man who'd been with them since the plane.
No.
Derek spoke with authority.
We just needed you to confirm his vitals. I've got it covered from here.
Sir, who are you?
The airport man squared off with Derek, speaking louder than necessary. Joseph grunted. Great, Fran thought. Just what they needed, a turf war.
I'm a friend, and this is Fran, Joseph's wife.
Joseph looked on as Derek nodded to Fran. She felt caught in the middle and not at all confident about what was best.
I believe she's legally in charge here.
Derek's tone left no question that he knew what he was talking about. The medic cleared his throat and addressed Fran.
Ma'am, your husband is in critical shape. He needs to get to a hospital now, and we will get him there safely.
No, Fran.
Joseph had pushed the words out with what must have been all his strength. His voice was quiet but audible for all. She took his hand and squeezed, a tight smile on her lips.
There.
She said it definitively.
Thank you for assisting us. I fully understand my husband's condition is serious. That's why we're here.
She looked at Derek, wondering if she should give the full story, but he seemed to read her mind and shook his head for her not to explain more.
I was just really surprised by his rapid decline on the flight over.
The paramedic narrowed his eyes but softened his voice.
Okay, listen, we've seen this before. Some passengers who board a plane in a medically challenged state respond poorly to the high altitude despite the pressurized cabin. He'll be better after some proper medical attention.
Fran nodded and smiled her professional smile she reserved for those she was about to dismiss.
Yes, thank you. I understand. We appreciate your help, but we'll be on our way now.
Derek immediately started walking away after motioning for the man pushing the wheelchair to follow. Fran gave the medics an apologetic smile and hustled after them. With all of their delays, she correctly assumed that their suitcase would have arrived.
There's our bag.
She lunged at the baggage claim belt for their dark green suitcase, while Derek waited with Joseph. A subdued man from the hospice met them outside of baggage claim to drive them to his facility. He appeared nervous to Fran, probably terrified Joseph would die on the way. Derek helped load him into the van, and then Fran slid in by his side. Derek said he'd follow behind them. 30 minutes of mostly napping later, they moved Joseph into what would be his final bedroom at the hospice facility, and Fran sighed in relief, which earned her an appreciative smile from Derek.
Well done.
He said it kindly, respectfully. She looked up, her head tipped back.
I can hardly believe we made it here. Thank God that part is over.
Derek and Fran talked with the staff doctor and agreed to give Joseph a hearty dose of some medicine to help him rest comfortably. For hours, Fran dozed fitfully in a chair by his bed, unconcerned about her comfort.
Hey, babe.
Joseph's voice was croaky-sounding. She cracked open her eyes and leaned forward, keeping her hand on his arm.
Okay then. You're looking better.
She felt a tremendous release. He was still with her, alive. He cleared his throat.
Yesterday. It was yesterday, right? That was really crappy.
She laughed a little and glanced toward the door, hoping to see a nurse.
Yeah, it was yesterday. A long day. A long, ugly day. Feeling like something to eat?
I'd take some water if you don't mind.
She would have liked for him to order bacon and eggs or something substantial, but he'd had a dismal appetite for a long time now, hence the 60-pound weight loss over the last few months. She got him some water, and they sat and talked. His voice was weak and raspy, but he could last for minutes at a time before falling silent again and closing his eyes. She hadn't thought they'd ever get to talk again after the flight and relished every word. That afternoon, Derek came back in to see them.
I have interesting news.
His announcement came after catching up on Joseph's status.
I just brought in another Alberio patient. She's in the room across from you.
Oh.
Joseph said slowly, a faint smile on his lips.
So it's a race, is it?
Derek laughed.
I'm not sure how to call the winner. First one to go or last one breathing?
I'm kind of thinking the first one to go wins.
Joseph raised his eyebrows.
Hey.
Fran had to admit, though, she appreciated the banter. This was the Joseph she knew and loved, always joking. Even so, now they were in the Arizona hospice, she didn't want to face the next part, why they were here.
You don't want me like this. My time is up. And I, for one, am quite ready.
He paused and looked at Fran like he was about to fall asleep again, then turned to face Derek.
What happens if we both go at the same time?
Derek grimaced at the question.
Please don't. That's all I have to say.
Fran gave Derek a concerned look.
Well, this will certainly keep you busy. Are they going to set up a bed for you here?
Nope, I'll be okay.
He stood to leave.
I'll check in with you both later.
Now that they were settled, Fran kept in contact with her daughters, deciding their eldest should fly out the next day to be with her parents. They hadn't discussed it before Fran and Joseph left, but since they were playing the waiting game, she recognized she could use the support, and Fran's sister offered to pay for the plane ticket. Back in Idaho, before the flight from hell, they'd been told that though Joseph could hang on for months, he could also go toes up, as Fran would say, at any moment. That possibility led to a frantic scramble to prepare to leave. She hadn't forewarned many people about what was going on. Since the flight, though, Fran seriously doubted he had long. Even with his rally, she figured he wouldn't come anywhere near holding out for months, probably not even weeks, possibly not even days. Now, every hour, it seemed, Fran remembered at least one more person she should call to update. Close friends, Joseph's 92-year-old mother, his 3 sisters. She placed the calls whenever Joseph napped, simultaneously feeling a sense of purpose bouncing between talking to them and to her husband, yet exhausted from the responsibility of keeping up with everything and everyone. It made her think of all the work it would involve to tell people when he died. The status calls were hard enough, especially when she called someone who hadn't known about his cryopreservation plan and was therefore surprised to find out they were in Arizona. Those conversations drained her fast. To their credit, no one who found out at this point argued with her. She hadn't told many people about her own membership with the cryonics facility and had let Joseph tell their family and friends. He was more well-read on the topic and did a better job defending their decision when someone disapproved, but now she was in charge of telling people herself. The next day, their daughter arrived. Joseph seemed glad to have her there, and Fran felt a weight lifted. She wasn't alone in the vigil any longer. Joseph took another downturn a day later, and Fran tried to stay close in case he woke up, barely ever leaving the room. One of Joseph's sisters flew in to see him one last time, as well as a friend who lived locally. Fran found it sweet that even displaced, her JoJo's loved ones came to see him before the end, though it didn't take his PhD in psychology to acknowledge their visits were more for them and Fran than for him. And she did indeed appreciate them all. When it was just the two of them for a minute, Fran asked him if he minded the visitors.
It's fine.
He shifted position in his bed.
I'm not very fun to be around, though, so thanks for playing hostess.
He smiled at her, his roomy eyes making contact with hers. Though Fran had booked a hotel room a block away, she'd slept in the chair next to Joseph each night, and only her daughter used the hotel room. But by day 4, she was so exhausted she let the staff talk her into going there for a proper night of sleep. She collapsed onto the spacious, delightfully flat bed and fell asleep instantly. It was the wee hours of the night when she first woke up and changed into her pajamas. Despite the many days of barely getting any sleep in the chair, her mind turned on at the crack of dawn. Blearily, she pulled on her clothes, ready to go see her husband again. The patient across the hall won the race that day, but by then, Joseph was dangerously close behind her. He acknowledged the commotion but was barely tracking his surroundings by then and hallucinating from time to time, which Fran knew was normal. But he was aware enough to deliver what would be his last joke after he heard that Derek and his team were processing the woman. He began with an appreciative grunt.
Good then. Now Alberia's all warmed up. My turn.
Fran sucked in her lips and tried harder not to crumble. She loved him so much for finding the funny side of things, even at the end of his life. She also hoped having it happen first across the hall would help soften the blow for her when his turn inevitably came. Final wait. Fran. Early the next morning, Fran called Derek and asked if he'd finished up yet with the other patient. She didn't know if the lady across the hall was a head-only or full-body suspension, let alone how long either one would take the Alberio team, but she'd feel better if they were on site again, ready to roll. Derek said he'd been home for nearly 8 hours and would come back to the hospice if needed.
It's always hard to tell.
She tried to loosen her grip on the phone.
I don't think you need to break any land speed records getting here, as Joseph would say. But I wouldn't dawdle too much either. He's getting close.
He assured her he'd be there right away after he headed back to Alberio for more supplies, and called in the on-call assistant and driver.
I'll see you at the hospice in about 45 minutes.
She knew how being on call went. As an operating room nurse, she'd pulled more than her fair share of such shifts. No doubt he'd wish he had more downtime, but at least he'd gotten some. When Derek arrived later, he found them at their usual stations, Fran holding Joseph's hand, his daughter touching his other arm. Derek stood next to Fran and assessed Joseph's condition while speaking softly to the two women.
How are you two holding up?
We're fine. Exhausted, perhaps, but doing okay.
Fran touched her daughter's shoulder briefly.
Thanks for coming back in. I wish you could have had a longer break, but...
Her voice trailed off as she blinked back tears.
That's why we're here.
Her words rushed out.
He wakes up now and then.
Joseph's daughter's voice cracked, and she took a breath in through her nose.
But he sometimes acts strange when he does, like he's lost his mind.
Derek nodded.
I think it's normal. He's got one foot in both worlds, and sometimes they blend.
Circling the drain.
Fran made eye contact with Derek and explained.
It's Joseph's favorite way to describe someone threatening to die.
He said that?
The daughter sounded less than amused, causing Fran to look up at her.
Well, when you reach our age, you start to know a lot of people who are circling the drain.
That sucks.
The daughter shook her head.
Yeah.
Fran sighed and turned her attention to Derek. This was her husband circling the drain in a very unusual sync, and she wanted to be prepared.
I'd like to go over what to expect. I'm not sure if I could handle anything overly surprising at this point.
Of course. Would you like to step out? He can probably still hear us and...
Right. That's a good idea.
The two women and Derek walked over to the now vacant room where Derek had so recently done what he was about to explain to them.
It looks like we still have a bit of time, but like you said, Fran, you never know. So for now, we'd like to load some ice chests into Joseph's room. They're heavy and difficult to schlep around, so having them in place is best, if you don't mind some crowding.
Fran nodded.
Of course.
Great. We'll have the rest of the more portable things.
He paused and looked around.
Maybe in here. That would be ideal, so I'll ask about that. Once the nurse makes the pronouncement, things will move fast. We'll need access to Joseph, which I know can be hard, but as soon as you're ready, we'll begin cooling him down.
He pursed his lips slightly, his eyes on Fran.
We'll step aside immediately, of course.
Fran's voice hitched.
This is important to Joseph, and to me. You know, we signed up for this procedure over a decade ago. Joseph especially has spent lots of time studying all things cryo. He'd kill me if I got in your way.
She smiled briefly at the joke.
We're here for the best cryopreservation you know how to do.
Her face contorted as she attempted to bring it back to neutral. Derek touched Fran's arm reassuringly.
Thank you. That's exactly what's going to happen, too.
He nodded at her daughter, who was following along with the conversation while her eyes filled with tears.
Do you want to be present for the hospice-based activities, or shall we wait until you step out?
We'll stay. Or,
Fran glanced at her daughter.
I'll stay. You?
Maybe. The younger woman lacked conviction.
That's fine. Fran, I'm sure you know the procedure, but just to make sure, we'll inject the meds right after the nurse gives the word. Obviously, the idea is not to revive him, which is why we get these specific drugs into him before we restart his heart. The meds will circulate once we artificially get his heart pumping. I'll announce each one as I push them through, which is also for the recording I'll be making for our documentation. Next, we'll move him into the portable ice bed and put ice on him, and within a few minutes, we'll be off. Do you think you'll join us at Alberio for the rest of the procedure?
The two women looked at each other, Fran silently questioning her daughter for only a split second before simultaneously shaking their heads no. They could sugarcoat the neuro procedure all they wanted, but no way did Fran need to see Joseph go through that, dead or not, coming back someday or not.
I think that's best. Do either of you have questions for me?
When they both said no, he told them he'd bring in the ice chests, and they returned to Joseph's room. When Derek arrived with the second chest, he had a helper with him.
I'm Chris. I'll be helping Derek with your husband.
Fran gave him a small smile.
We still have 2 more ice coolers to bring in, but we'll use the room across the hall for the cart and to wait while we prep the meds.
I could use a break to stretch my legs.
Fran looked at Derek.
Mind if I tag along to see your vehicle?
Not at all.
She walked out with the 2 Alberio men, down the hall and out the side door that led to a small parking area.
Oh.
She widened her eyes in surprise seeing the vehicle.
It looks like an unmarked ambulance.
That's pretty much what it is.
The 2 men loaded the ice coolers onto a cart while Fran poked her head into the vehicle and looked around. She wiped yet another tear away as she imagined Joseph riding in the currently empty space. No siren would sound off during that final trip in a vehicle that never transported living patients. She blinked a few times as the men closed the vehicle's back door.
Have you done this before?
She walked beside Chris.
Oh, well, I've been part of the stabilization team once before. Derek here is our true star. He's handled all the patients for the last 5 years, but I've done a lot of training workshops.
He sounded a bit guilty.
Sure. I understand.
She was extra thankful Derek was here, and that Joseph had held off until after they'd handled the other woman.
We'll be waiting in the other room.
Derek opened the door to leave Joseph's room after they'd stacked the last of the ice coolers. A hospice worker that Fran didn't know stood outside the room, about to come in. The well-dressed woman glanced at Fran briefly, and then spoke to Derek.
We need to have a talk.
Her tone, though not angry, wasn't happy either, and the frown didn't bode well.
Please follow me. That didn't sound good.
Fran's daughter wrinkled her nose while watching them disappear into the room across the hall.
Agreed. I guess we'll find out if it has anything to do with us.
Fran seriously hoped not. They'd chosen this facility specifically because it was cryonics friendly. She hoped they hadn't somehow outworn their welcome. Derek came back a few minutes later.
That was the facility director.
He closed the door.
Is there a problem?
Fran squeezed Joseph's hand a little tighter.
No, we're fine. They had patients or family members inquire about our presence here yesterday, and they're not about to tell them people are being prepped for cryopreservation. It's not always well accepted.
He hesitated, waiting for her to respond.
Oh, I know.
Fran had heard what people told Joseph from time to time. It was why she didn't tend to tell people about this.
They're afraid that if others find out what we're doing, they'll find it upsetting. It doesn't set the soothing tone they're after.
Fran glanced from Joseph to Derek.
What do they want?
She's asking us to be more discreet. Quieter if possible. I need to think it over some more, but I think we'll continue to wait in the other room, but we might modify our plans and move more of the equipment over here sooner rather than later. That would make it a slower transition so we can control our presence in the hallway and avoid being seen by others. And we'll pay better attention to our noise level.
We flew all the way down here to be at this very facility.
Fran felt annoyed that Derek would have to change any of his plans, or that she was feeling guilty for being there.
This is supposed to go smoothly. I would never have taken that flight.
She was not going to break down, so she pressed her lips together to stop anything more from coming out.
It's all going to be fine. We've got this covered, Fran. We'll bring in some more cases. This will be an optimal cooldown. That's not in jeopardy. You did the right thing coming here, okay? This isn't a problem.
She filled her lungs with air.
Okay, then.
She let out her breath, and turning back to Joseph, she wondered if he'd picked up on any of that, the words or her tone. She didn't want to cause him any stress, so she needed to recenter herself. Knowing that touch and hearing are the last senses to go when someone is dying, she figured that might be all he had left at this point. She needed to get back to being with him and stop being dramatic. Derek spent time in the room, joining Fran and her daughter as they waited throughout the morning and early afternoon. Joseph slept most of the time, only waking briefly on occasion, and even then, Fran wasn't so sure he was aware of them, despite his open eyes.
I don't know if you know it, but everyone at Alberio is signed up for cryopreservation. We treat our patients exactly the way we hope future Alberio staff will handle us. Joseph and I could be best friends in 200 years.
He paused.
Or whenever the time comes. We'd hate to need to apologize in person for anything.
I like that.
Fran smiled.
This is all such a gamble.
Do you remember
Joseph's daughter leaned forward, changing the subject.
how he'd look after snow blowing the walkway?
Fran laughed at the vivid vision of him before he came inside.
Oh, my word. Every time he came in, he'd happily announce that he'd had another successful trial run at freezing himself.
She smiled, open-mouthed, remembering how funny her husband could be.
He'd be covered in snow from his hat and beard all down his coat and legs. What a crack-up.
A stinky crack-up, too, if I recall.
The women laughed together with Derek.
Oh.
Fran focused back on Joseph.
He squeezed my hand. You hear us laughing? We're just having a good time at your expense.
She squeezed back and tried to laugh.
I wish you could join us again.
She looked up at her daughter and Derek, then smiled back at Joseph.
Someday.
Later that afternoon, Derek was called out of the room to talk with the facility director again.
They have an incoming patient.
He glanced around the room, looking over the equipment they'd already brought in.
We'll need to get our gear out of the room now.
Damn.
Fran looked back at Joseph, assessing him. He could last the whole night still, and if they needed the room, Alberio didn't have any right to it. Derek ran his hand through his hair.
Sorry, they told us it could happen, but we were hoping the timing worked out differently.
What will you do?
Fran eyed the ice chests already crowding the room.
How long do you have?
30 minutes, maybe 45, but we'll pull our stuff out now. Maybe stage some of it just outside the side lot door. It's a staff entrance, so it shouldn't bother anyone.
So long as it doesn't impede you and Chris doing what you need to do, as quickly as you can do it.
They both watched Joseph for a minute.
I really don't think he has long.
Fran watched as Joseph took an extended pause between breaths.
I agree. I'm going to call in our driver, Sarah, and start moving the gear out of the room. I'll let the nurse know she may want to come in now.
Minutes later, equipment and people crowded the room, all waiting on Joseph. Fran couldn't help but note the differing meaning Joseph's death had for each of them. For some, it was just another moment of the day. The nurse would make the death pronouncement and move on to another patient. For Fran and her daughter, it was the end of a loving relationship. For Derek, it was the start of his job. Possibly, in the future, there would be a different requirement for how close to death someone needed to be before they could begin cryopreservation. Fran was well aware that the very definition of dead had changed as medical advances came about, and likely would again. But for now, they needed a death legally declared before they could begin. In Derek's role, he was antsy with anticipation, while others wanted it to never come. But death, like birth, moved along at its own pace. The director cracked open the door.
The emergency is over.
She took a moment looking around the room.
Our incoming patient passed before they left the hospital.
She nodded at the room across the hall.
The room is still yours.
Thanks for letting us know. We just finished moving the stuff out. I don't think we have much longer, though.
The attending nurse nodded her agreement to the director, who smiled faintly and closed the door. Final departure. Derek. Derek focused equally on the nurse and Joseph, ready to jump into action the second she said the words. He'd already talked with her privately to make sure she understood their desire to begin the cool-down as fast as possible. At 1 minute before 5 o'clock, nearly 12 hours after Fran had called him back to the hospice, the nurse made the death pronouncement and Derek signaled Chris and got to work. While he moved furniture out of the way to gain easier access to Joseph's bed, he automatically started narrating the goals of the stabilization for the family and the nurse who lingered back, still watching. To his own ears, his voice sounded authoritative and calm. Exactly what was best in this situation.
The aim is to cool down Joseph quickly to get results similar to when someone falls into icy waters. But we can do a better job by providing lots of support with circulated medications.
Chris wheeled the cart into Joseph's room and poured the first buckets of ice into the mounted tub to create a base layer. Derek took out a syringe and pushed the first of the meds into Joseph's PICC line. Longer and going deeper into large central veins than a usual IV line, the PICC line was how they administered the meds that had kept him comfortable in recent days.
These will keep the blood circulation useful to his brain.
He spoke like an elementary school teacher, ready to list off the definitions of the week's vocabulary words. He took out the next syringe and pushed it in, continuing his explanation for each syringe.
We'll keep it from clotting, constrict the vessels to keep the blood pressure up, keep it from getting toxic, add some glucose to nourish the cells, and finish for now with a little anesthesia to slow down how much oxygen the brain needs.
He chased it all with saline after the final medicine to help flush it into Joseph's body.
You're okay?
Derek looked up at Fran as Chris dumped more buckets of ice into the tub.
Yes.
Her voice was quiet and hoarse. She glanced at her daughter, whose glassy-eyed gaze remained fixated on her father. Fran placed her hand on her arm.
You don't have to stay.
The younger woman took one step toward her dad, then seemed to think better of it, and headed out of the room.
Yeah, I'm out.
Derek could appreciate her decision.
Did you?
He motioned his head toward the door, asking Fran. He didn't want to spend time with family members at that juncture, but he also didn't want to cause any more distress.
I'd like to stay. Please, go on.
Ready to move him?
Chris took his 2 corners of the sheet under Joseph and nodded at Derek.
On 3.
Derek switched focus from Fran to Chris as he grabbed the other 2 bedding corners.
1, 2, 3.
They deftly moved their patient from the bed to the ice bath on top of the cart, and Chris added in more buckets of ice from the cooler. As Derek leaned over to get the thumper from under the cart, he reminded Fran what came next.
This is the chest compression device I told you about. It'll start those meds circulating. And Chris will continue adding ice to cool him down faster.
Derek put the device's strap under Joseph's back, positioned the suction cup piston above the chest, and turned the machine on. It began rhythmically pushing down and drawing the piston back up. The hospice nurse stepped closer to Joseph at that point.
You want me to take out the PICC line now?
Derek didn't look up from grabbing a vial from his kit.
No. Leave in the line, please. I have some more meds I'll inject on the way. I think we're fine on the ice bath now, Chris.
Let me know when you're ready to leave so I can close the other patients' doors. I don't want to have to talk to any more family members about this like I did yesterday.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for that. We'll be ready in about 2 minutes.
She gave a slow nod and backed out of the room to close the doors. Derek looked up at Fran.
That's about all we have to do here. He's off to a great start so far, Fran. Thank you for flying down for this. I know it's been hard.
Fran pressed her lips together.
It's what he wanted.
She gave Derek a quick but fierce hug.
Thank you for your help preparing Joseph for his life take 2, as he calls it. You've been very good to us.
It's my pleasure. You're sure you don't want to come along?
She was already shaking her head and looking down.
I understand. Okay, let's head out. We're at 17 minutes now.
He pulled the cart out the door, turning off the thumper momentarily for noise control as they headed down the empty hallway to exit the building. Once loaded into the back of the vehicle, Sarah navigated the 10-minute drive, while Derek and Chris administered the large volume of medication still needed to prepare Joseph for the in-house procedures. Derek checked on the effect the ice bath was having on Joseph's temperature and wasn't pleased. He must have been running a fever before his death. That information would be good to know in advance for future patients. Joseph was a neuropatient, head only, and though preparing a head was far faster than a whole body, and therefore potentially the better option, assuming future medicine figured out how to replace bodies, it also meant there would be the process of removing Joseph's body from his head. It ranked as one of the less desirable aspects of his job, but he likened it to limb amputation, and as everyone knew, sometimes you just had to do what was necessary. Derek prepared himself for the next few hours. 3 other team members greeted them as soon as the ambulance doors flung open when they arrived at Alberio 31 minutes after the death pronouncement.
Okay, we need more ice. He's not cooling down fast enough.
The Alberio team loaded on more ice to get their newest patient cooled further. Though not fully at the ideal temperature, they didn't want to lose the time advantage they had with a local hospice stabilization procedure. They rolled Joseph and his ice bath cart to the operating table, while Derek suited up in a gown and gloves to join the other 8 members of the preservation team. Each member had a role they'd mostly performed in training, but some of this crew had just gone through the process the day before and were primed for efficiency. A team member brought the prepared tray of instruments to the head surgeon, Dr. Bill Brioni, who picked out a scalpel and made his first incision.
The cryoprotectant is ready?
Yes, right here.
Another team member rolled over the supply of human antifreeze. The surgeon made the cut necessary to isolate Joseph's head and hooked up the machine to its 4 major blood vessels. Immediately, he threw the switch to begin slowly replacing the water-laden blood with a unique vitrification solution. With it, once the process was done, there was a drastically decreased chance of cell-damaging ice crystals forming at below freezing temperatures. Minimizing cell damage through vitrification was the first key to cryonics. The second was reanimation, but that wasn't their concern at the moment. Scientists of the future would sort that one out. The theory was that forthcoming medical science would be able to not only revive someone from their cryosuspension, but also repair what was wrong with their bodies upon their deanimation, or even to grow a new body. The current ideas to do so were by either turning on stem cells to regrow the rest of the body, using a body clone, or something yet to be imagined. Only the brain mattered in the end, so that's what they focused on. They'd have the rest of Joseph's body cremated and sent to his family for burial, scattering, or sitting in an urn on a mantle. A fast plunge to around -100 degrees Celsius would kick off the final stages of the procedure, followed by a slower cooling period to reach -196 degrees Celsius, the temperature of liquid nitrogen. The whole cooling process would take 4 days to complete before his long-term storage with all the other Alberio clients in the patient care bay. Days later, with the proper temperature reached, the staff members gathered outside the surgery suite. They put Joseph in a metal container called a dewar, filled it with liquid nitrogen, and performed their brief induction ceremony. Derek said the words staff members had spoken 93 times before.
May the cold that holds you be gentle and light, and the future awake with promise bright. From past to future in time's kind hand, may you rise anew and walk the land.
The end.
I'm Nicole Frens. My dad's head is frozen in a canister in Arizona. He's Alcor's cryonic patient number 94. Flight to Tomorrow is a partly fictionalized story about the final days of his life, transitioning from Idaho to Arizona, from living to frozen. It's the prequel, if you will, to my full novel, Cryoshift, which I began writing in his early days as a frozen dude. He wanted to see the future. I got him there, for now. I hope you enjoy meeting my fictional dad, Joseph, and his fictional wife, my mom, Fran, in Flight to Tomorrow.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.